podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. I'm a two-time Paralympian, online training and nutrition coach, and owner of James Robert Fitness. You can find more of my content by going to my website, fitamputee.co.uk. Today is the 100th episode of the Mindset Game podcast. Before we get started with it, first off, let me take this opportunity to welcome back the regular listeners. And if this is your first time listening to the show, I hope you enjoy this episode and decide to subscribe to the show. On today's show, I've got Andres Valdes. He has been a US diplomat for over 12 years, so he's acquired vast international leadership and management experience. He speaks a multitude of languages. He has led teams as small as 2 to as large as 200 in 8 countries. Now he's a part-time entrepreneur using his international experience along with his personal story of overcoming financial, academic and family setbacks to inspire, motivate individuals through his keynote speaking, writing and advising. Not forgetting he has written for the Everyday Power blog, Thrive Global and Medium. He has also spoken to corporate staff, students and mastermind groups. And finally, but not least, he is also a lecturer at the Leadership School. So welcome onto the show, Andre.
It's great to be here, James. It's an honor to be on your show, so thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for the kind words. So before we delve into today's episode, Andre, can you talk us through, obviously, how you came about first wanting to publish your book in the first place?
So I got this idea because I had, for a long time, I've had a desire to be an entrepreneur, and I really didn't know where to start. I had dabbled in several ideas; they didn't go anywhere, and then I took a step back, and I started really looking inside of myself. And one of the things that I discovered is that what I really loved was something that I had been doing my entire life, but I didn't know. And it was basically mentoring, guiding, and coaching people. One of my first jobs after high school, I was coaching a basketball team for middle school kids. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I really loved the idea of getting a group of guys together, motivating them, coaching them, trying to help them accomplish things. But in the process of teaching them how to play basketball, I was really trying to teach them about life. And so that idea kind of 20 years later was kind of still with me. And so the idea from the book came about because as I was kind of doing this self-reflection, I was thinking, what can I share with the world? What do I have in me? And as I started writing and thinking, what I realized is that I had a story that I could share that could kind of inspire people and motivate people and kind of show them what were the steps that I took to overcome so many things that I've seen that are really holding so many people back. And so I kind of started with that idea, and really I got the inspiration also from my wife, because my wife was always asking me, how did you, accomplish this, and how did you get out of this situation, and how did you this? And I never had an answer. And then when as I was writing this book and I was thinking, I said, you know what? What I realized was I had made specific decisions in my life that helped me go in a different direction. And as I was writing, I started finding, at this point, I made this decision, and then I made this decision. And I actually wrote down the 7 most powerful decisions that I made that kind of helped me take my life in a different direction. Because I thought if I could do this, this is something that I could share with other people. And, one of the other things that motivated me was that I loved reading about personal development and leadership. And so when people want to start businesses and they want to do things, sometimes they do things that they have no idea, they don't know anything about. So I really focused on something that I was already interested in, which was the whole personal development and leadership and that area. And so that's kind of why I kind of went in that direction.
But then the 5 topics you raised with me, obviously, in our correspondence via email, you talked about, obviously, the passion, and people's passion can sometimes be overrated. Can you kind of elaborate what you mean by that point? Because from my perspective, when you talk to me, obviously, as we're speaking now,
Yeah.
you have a passion for your career. So
Yeah.
how can that passion be kind of overrated when you're
Yeah.
doing something that you enjoy?
Yeah. That's a great topic. You see, I think what happens, I was talking to a group of college students, and a lot of them have this idea that, oh, the first thing you need to do is find your passion, find your passion. And once you find your passion, you just go at it. But here's the thing, for most people, when you're 15, 16, 18, 19, it's unlikely that you're going to know what your passion is. So the advice that I give to young people is find something that you're interested in. Once you're interested in something, stick with it. Commit to it. After you commit, the passion will develop. The problem is we're trying to find the passion first without committing to something. Unless you commit to something, you won't stick with it long enough for the passion to develop. So while I do believe that passion is important, I believe that you need to commit to something in order for that passion to build up. Because the problem is sometimes people will spend a few months on something and then they'll move on to something else. I've done it myself. I've experimented with so many different things, so many ideas and so many topics. But the thing is that unless you really stick with something long enough, you'll never really understand what the passion is. So that's why I say, yes, passion is important, but I really believe that you need to commit to something first so that the passion can develop.
But then, Andre, some entrepreneurs, and this is probably some people could take this one way or another. Some would argue that you need to kind of to be successful, and this is probably an argument I don't agree with now. They say to try and have your, as in this quote now, have your fingers in as many pies as possible to be able to kind of dip your toes in and kind of find your feet to kind of prepare yourself and succeed. It's something I don't agree with, because it's like, okay, they could say for people that don't do that, they are on the defensive, and they would say if you do that, you're on the offensive. Well, I would disagree, because I think we are, as people, yes, we are defensive, and we will do things that are not risky. But then on the other hand, if you stretch yourself so thinly, you're not doing something that you really enjoy. So you're not really going to do it wholeheartedly. And which side of the fence would you kind of say you fitted in along those when I asked you that kind of question?
Yeah. And here's the thing: I don't believe that there's one way of doing it. I think you have to find the way that works for you and commit to that way. Because if you don't commit, nothing's going to happen. Whether you have passion or not, unless you commit to something, it's just not going to happen. And so I do believe that, you should try out a few different things and see which, if you don't have a good understanding, that's why I say start with your interests. What are you interested in? You like reading, you like sports, you like psychology. Okay, experiment with that. See where it goes. But at some point, it's like when you're standing out in the sun, you don't automatically get burned, right? But if you use a magnifying glass and somebody points that magnifying glass at your forehead, in a few seconds, they're going to burn a hole straight through your head, because the energy of the sun is concentrated in one point. So when you concentrate your energy at one point, that's when you can cause the most damage. And that's why I feel that when you put all your energy into as few things as possible, that's when you have a greater impact. But if you're scattered all over the place, for me personally, I can't concentrate. I can't move forward if I'm just working on too many things at the same time. And so one of the important things that I did is I wrote down what are the key areas of my life, and I narrowed it down to 7 things. So I try to put most of my energy into those 7 things. My health, my faith, my family, my finances, my career, those types of things, my community. Anything that's not on that list, if I'm working on it, I know I'm not going to invest too much time in it. Video games, movies, drinking, all that stuff. It's like, that's not really a priority. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's not a priority for me at this time because I'm trying to concentrate as much of my energy into those core areas.
And now, Andres, coming from the key points that you raised there,
Yeah.
if you have to prioritize, and it's not an easy thing to do in respect to those personal things,
Yeah.
what order would you put those in preference, or would it or would it vary depending on the circumstance?
It varies by person. It varies by your age. It varies by your circumstances. But for me, what I want people to do is to actually take some time and write down what are those key areas, what are those key priorities for your life. Because if you don't have those things in the right order, what happens is that your life can drift into a direction that you really weren't trying to go. So for me, I have my faith is number one. Number two is my health, because if I'm not in good health, I really can't be a good provider for my family. So I put my health really over my family because I want to be there for them. And then I have my family, and then I have everything else after that. And so what I realized is that I try to you can't have balance, but what I do try to do is put as much effort as I can into those areas.
But what would you say to somebody? And this is a question I got asked. Oh God, I think it was about a few months ago.
Yeah.
They kind of I said, where would you prioritize your health? And they kind of put their career, their family, and I think their health was secondary. And my argument was to them, well, how can you put your health so low down on the spectrum when in the long run your health needs to be, I would say, probably more important than the career, because like you said, if you're not in good health, one, you can't do your job properly, and one, you can't then look after your family. So it was like I don't know, I don't know where the person was coming from in terms of their argument, but it's like, well, I'm not dictating to you to change that way, but I'm just putting it from that perspective, whereas you need to put more importance on it. But what would you possibly say to maybe that individual, but then to a certain extent to people that think in that kind of mindset?
Yeah, and you know what? You're so right, James. You can't convince people to change their priorities. But what I like to do is just to ask them questions to get them to reflect on their priorities. Because once you do a little thinking and you say, hey, wait a minute, what good is it to have a great career if I have terrible health? What good is it to spend my salary or my income on my poor health? Right? So when you ask people the right questions, that's when they can kind of get the right answers themselves. I think the problem in this world of leadership is that a lot of people have this idea that leaders need to have the answers, but I really feel that leaders need to have better questions. Because when you ask people questions, that's when you get them to kind of reflect and think on their own. I got 3 kids, and one of the things that I learned in parenting is that I can't tell them what to do all the time. I need to train them to think on their own, so that one day when I'm gone, they can make the right priorities without me being there. And the only way I can get them to do that is if I get them to think and reflect on their behavior.
But do you think, and this is coming from a different direction now, and kind of the kind of questioning, do you think maybe, and your job obviously traveling around the world has probably helped you get a perspective of this, do you think as a society, as a whole, we have kind of gone away from that to some extent, where people don't reflect on themselves and take on board what other people's opinions are, and are not, you could say, go on the defensive, or I don't agree with your point of view, so I'm not going to listen to it at all. Do you think that is a sense of a perspective, or do you think it's just the way we've kind of become with society being, well, you've got access to information at a click of a button?
Yeah. James, let me ask you a question. When was the last time you were bored?
Gosh. I think it's a kind of a broad question, because it depends on what you would say was bored, because you could
Yeah.
put it bound. You could from probably a health perspective, people
Mhm.
would say they're bored when in fact, okay, it's a number of factors. You could be dehydrated. You could be hungry.
Right.
It's in terms of
Let me
boredom.
tell you. Let me tell you what I was getting at. You know, we live in the information age. We live in the greatest age of distraction that I think has ever existed. We don't have time anymore. 20, 30 years ago, you didn't have a smartphone in your hand. You didn't have the internet in your hand, right? So you had time to actually be bored and maybe do a little thinking, right? So now, if you're in line at the coffee shop, if you're in line in a restaurant, if you're every second that we have, we're consuming and consuming and consuming information. So we as a society, we just don't have time anymore to just stop and just spend a few minutes just thinking about where we are, about our priorities, about just thinking. We're not really intentional. It's because we're always just consuming more and more and more and more information.
But on a probably more negative note, there,
Yeah.
that's dangerous because you can get manipulated quite easily if you're not thinking for yourself.
If you're not thinking for yourself, absolutely. Yeah, if you're not thinking for yourself, and that's why I'm a big proponent of just reflecting, thinking. Of course, we need to know what's going on and stay informed and things like that. But I'm very careful about what I consume in terms of media and how much news and all that stuff I take in. I try to regulate that. I don't want my life to revolve around how much of this information I'm consuming all the time because I feel that it can kind of get out of control.
But then you could probably go a step further in terms of the information that you consume. Maybe,
Hmm.
maybe more so here, the American media has got an agenda by depending on what station that you watch.
Right.
It's here in the UK.
Uh-huh.
I would say they were once impartial. I think it's depending on where they stand, depending on who they've got an axe to grind against. So I think our
Hmm.
media is just as bad, or getting just as bad. So I think it's, well, you would think from a impartial standpoint now that
Hmm.
the media outlets should be impartial, and they are
Hmm.
there to inform people, not
Hmm.
have their agenda themselves as to, okay, we don't like where a particular government is going down. Well,
Hmm.
that's not your decision to make. It's for you to give us, the people at large, the facts, and it's
Hmm.
for us then to then, obviously, like you were saying, reflect on what the information we've been
Hmm.
given and get
Hmm.
and think for ourselves.
Hmm.
How does that impact on me? How is it going to affect on my family, and all the different circumstances where you are at in your life, and go
Hmm.
from there. Whereas, and look at, is it good or bad? Not say, well, this is that. Especially, it's definitely health things that they'll ring alarm bells with me, because they'll say X amount is. We've had a sugar tax come in the last few weeks, and
Hmm.
they
Yeah.
very much have an agenda, I suppose, as to, well, this is going to, how would I word this? Have an impact on low income families.
Okay.
Well, is it really? If you give people the information and give them the knowledge and educate people,
Hmm.
they then, okay. Some may still have those habitual things of consuming things that are not good for them. There's
Right.
nothing you can do about that. That's somebody's
Right.
habit. Yes, you can change it if you give
Hmm.
them the tools, but some won't ever change their ways. There's nothing you can do
Right.
about that. Whereas
Right.
some, you give them the information, they'll become more knowledgeable. They'll be able to look at that information and digress it and make choices from that, and then maybe
Hmm.
make healthier choices. But saying that it's going to affect them financially is not true, because
Right.
those are all choices. I
Right.
Okay, in theory, maybe it should be the companies that fit the bill for that, because it's them are putting in the sugary products. but that's a different argument altogether. I've had arguments with people left, right, and centre. Okay, I can see the viewpoint you're coming from, but this is my argument.
Yeah, and that's and to sort of tie it up with something, kind of the theme of my book is, and the title is Leader by Choice. And the reason why I named it Leader by Choice is because it's really about encouraging people to take a proactive role to kind of deciding what direction they want to take their lives. Because we have this idea that, we're waiting to be led. We're waiting for the government. We're waiting for our leaders. We're waiting for the prime minister. We're waiting for our educators to lead us and tell us what to do. But, I really feel that each one of us has a responsibility to really decide what type of leader you want to be. And so there's this debate where people say, are leaders made or are leaders born? And they've been debating this forever, right? And so what I like to bring into this conversation is I really don't believe in either of those options. I believe that leadership is a choice, right? And you have a choice to decide how much responsibility you want to take. You have a choice to decide what direction you want to go, what type of leader you want to be, how you want to live your life. And so that's really what I'm pushing. And that's why I'm so cautious with the consumption of media and with kind of like waiting for people to decide things for me, right? And so that's why I'm really intentional about getting people to do that reflecting for the purpose of deciding what direction they want to go.
But Andre, would you not argue that, well, this might be my argument to that, that it's a bit of a combination of you were born to certain extracts that you have certain traits that you are technically born with, and obviously leadership. Some are better at it than others as they grow up, but I think with experience, you will become better at leadership in terms of how you manage people. I think the good argument in terms of that would be the ones of people that are very practical versus the ones that are very educational. Yes, you have people that are very savvy in terms of being able to put information in from an academic standpoint, but then if you ask them to put into a practical environment, they can't do it. Whereas if you have on the flip side of that, somebody that's practical in knowledge, they can take that information and kind of maybe in an essence make it more simple for the layman people, the general public, to be able to understand, and thus I think maybe they're better at leading others and from a leadership perspective, because they can digress that information and spread it out to the masses. So that I think they're better at people managing than say somebody who is academically driven, and it's kind of a different language altogether when you are writing for journals and that kind of perspective.
And I wanted to get away from that because I didn't want to write something that was overly academic. I wanted it filled with real life experiences, and that's why I use so much of my personal experiences, because I want to help people get away from the idea that leaders are these people with high positions, that leaders are people with these positions, that leaders are people in the military, presidents and prime ministers, because the first step in leadership is really leading yourself. And that's where leadership starts, because if you can't lead yourself, there's no way you're going to lead somebody else, because people want to know, is James doing the things that he's teaching on this show? Are you living by these principles? And if you're not, you don't have trust and you won't have any followers. So what I try to, especially with the younger people, what I try to get them to see is the first step is seeing yourself as a leader. Once you get that under control, then you're ready to start moving up, because I see that leadership is more like a ladder, right? It's not like a walk. It's more like a ladder. And each step on that ladder is kind of different responsibilities that you take. And at that first step as a leader, it's really the responsibility to manage yourself.
But Andre, would you argue to a certain extent, I'll say maybe this is a generalization now to the younger ones, do you think they are and if we harken back to probably education and go back to, say, high school and earlier now, they are less inclined to do that for themselves in maybe this day and age than, say, your generation and mine. Do you think they say, well, the school needs to give me all the tools to be able to excel, whereas I think, and it's people probably that know me could maybe say this is not true of myself, but I think on reflection, looking back, I don't think I was that way inclined. I think I wanted to learn as much as I could outside of the classroom as well, whereas I think this generation are less inclined. They're quite, you could call it lazy. I'll give them the benefit and doubt and say it's a kind of laissez-faire attitude. They'll do the bare minimum to get by.
And you know, I don't blame this generation for that, because that's what they were taught. They didn't become that way on their own, right? So I feel that my generation created that. So it's our responsibility to do something about it. Instead of just saying, hey, you know, these kids are lazy, they're this, they're that. Well, we created that. So I think we have a responsibility to kind of show them and lead them in a way that connects with them, right? But if the approach is, hey, you guys are this and you guys are no good and you guys are that, there's no connection. We just have to find out what are those key points that will connect and motivate and inspire that generation. And what I find with that younger generation is just they have low tolerance for pain. They have a low tolerance for things that they dislike. They have a low tolerance for discomfort. And as a leader, I just have to find a different way of managing around that and still tapping into the resources that they have, tapping into their brain power and to their abilities and to their commitment. So that's what leaders have to do.
But from one perspective now, Andre, wouldn't that be it's not really a negative, but a disadvantage for them, because obviously being able to overcome adversity,
right?
Obviously hardship,
right?
Are two, and there's probably many others that I've probably forgotten, ways of not excelling, bettering yourself. So if you don't have those tools, aren't you putting yourself at a little bit of a disadvantage?
If you have a low tolerance for pain and discomfort, you are definitely at a disadvantage. And that's why one of the things that I try to tell organizations and schools when I speak to schools is that you have to do something to help build up the reserve of perseverance and resilience in these students, in this younger generation, because I do feel from my perspective that they do have a lower tolerance for pain, but the leaders in those organizations need to find out ways that they can tap into the strengths that they have, right? Because once you tap into the strengths that they have, you can help move them along and move them up that leadership ladder. And at the same time, coach them, teach them, show them.
But if we pinpoint, and I think it's going to vary from individual to individual.
Yes, it does.
As to why those, we'll call them traits now, are low. But in a kind of a generalization now, what are kind of some of the key factors as to why that has become apparent?
I don't know. I think some of that goes, like I said earlier, I think it goes back to the way that we raise them as children. Because now I realize that as parents, we want to do, like I went through when I was growing up, I was homeless on more than one occasion. I lost two parents unexpectedly. I struggled with academics. I struggled in so many areas. And now when I'm raising my children, I want to minimize the pain and the struggles that they're going through. But at the same time that I'm doing that, I'm kind of not giving them enough perseverance that they're going to need. So one of the things that I've done in my parenting to sort of adjust with that is we've gone heavy on sports. We've gone heavy in like excelling in the arts, like music and piano and those types of things. And what we're doing is we're not making it easy for them. We're making them struggle. So we've intentionally made them struggle a little bit, right? So we push them really hard in sports. And I don't want to say push like we force, but we have high expectations in everything that they do because we don't want everything to be easy for them. So that's one of the ways that we are artificially kind of helping them build up their reserves of resilience and perseverance.
I get where you're coming. I get what you mean. So it's you could say in an essence, it is instilling a habit. Really, if you
That's
can't
right.
get it from a perspective of it is, you could argue that it's naturally ingrained for, say, the older generations.
That's
They
right.
have to overcome. Well, if we could talk about, we happen back to the people during the war, they've got that hardship and
That's right.
the aftermath of that. The baby boomers have got their own hardships, obviously, and then you've got the decades after.
That's right.
And then obviously the more recently, as we talked about, they're a bit lower then. So it's replacing like for like, really.
That's right. It's kind of like creating almost like artificial struggles and difficulty, right? Just to kind of help them build up that strength in those areas.
So on the plus side, from an academic point now, Andre,
Okay.
would it be better for organizations, we'll say schools more specifically now, to I don't know. I know they do like to, you could say in an essence, reward bad behavior with giving them in terms of say taking them out of the mainstream and rewarding them with sport. I've probably not worded that very well, but giving them another alternative to keep them out of trouble. Whereas I think some would argue you are rewarding bad behavior with kind of a reward. And I think where your argument would come from, that is not a bad thing because you are giving them an opportunity to maybe overcome some of their hardships that they're having to deal with and get those skills which you and I would maybe call, how would you word it? Something that's easy to come by because we've experienced those hardships along the way, and maybe they aren't as good at dealing with like you said, the qualities that you need to deal with everyday life.
That's right. There was this book called Mindset by psychologist Carol Dweck, and one of the main sort of the thesis of the book, or one of the main issues in that book that she discovers in her research, is that the way that we've been rewarding and incentivizing the youth and people in general, we've been rewarding them with compliments and money and all these types of things. But specifically in the academic, in school settings, what she found is the most effective thing to motivate students is what she found is praising them for their efforts and not for the results. Because when you focus on the effort, you're teaching the youth to persevere and to focus on that continuous improvement, keep going, keep getting better, little by little by little, versus when you focus on, hey, you got the highest grade in the class, or you did a great job on this test. Yeah, that's kind of like a one-time thing. But when you focus on effort, you're building that habit, which is something that you mentioned. And the goal is to really create a habit of excellence.
So it's the book, in essence, is probably what the sport was originally designed for. It's obviously to praise people's perseverance, whereas probably now is out and out business sport. And I think school, to a certain extent, is similar to a certain extent because it is a results-driven business. People need to obviously hit the marks in terms of grades, whatnot.
Yeah.
Probably maybe more so in Europe, maybe less so in the US, depending on how you look at things. Maybe from an eligibility standpoint, that is the same because you've got to hit certain academic results to be eligible. So it probably, if I bring that argument in, it would tie in nicely with it's a results-driven business. So I think it's a difficult one for schools in essence because it's a very fine line between the two. Okay, they want all the pupils to do well, but at the end of the day, they are looked upon on how well they're doing with results in terms of finances.
That's right.
And obviously prestige from the be it from the outside perspective and the greater community. So it's a difficult one for them to find themselves in, and they're kind of in a no-win situation.
It is a very difficult situation. That's why I'm not a teacher.
So my final question for you, Andres, before we wrap up the episode today, if you had to summarize what we've been speaking about in this episode into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
That would, in one sentence, what I would say is, I want everyone to be intentional about deciding what type of leaders they want to be. Make that decision and go after it.
That's some good words there, Andre. So once again, thanks for coming on the Mindset Game podcast.
James, thank you so much for letting me be on your show. I see that you're really active. You're putting out great content, and congratulations for having a great show.
Thank you very much, Andre. And thanks again for coming on.
Absolutely.
And before I forget, I would really appreciate it if you would be so kind as to leave a short written review, as it helps to get the podcast more notoriety, and it would be more visible in future to others, and thus helping more people, which my guests and I are all about. Once again, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time for another episode of the Mindset Game podcast.